Now nobody can hear me. We're going to get started. I hereby call this meeting of the Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the prayer, pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Here.
Mr. Gabbard?
Here.
Mr. Geraci?
Here.
Mr. Kelsch?
Here.
Mr. DiNardo?
Here.
Mr. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
Here.
All members present. Moving on to item E, amendment of agenda. I have two items this evening. In reports of standing committees of council, we're going to add the 4/13/21 Housing, Health, and Public Safety Report. And under communications, we are going to add communication from the treasurer for the earnings tax reports. And that's all I have. May I have a motion to accept the agenda? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Have a second? Mr. Braden?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item F, minutes of previous meeting, April 27th, 2021 minutes. Mr. Brady.
Motion to accept the minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo.
Yes, please.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item H, request to address council. It's with the ASAP Norwood Group. Mrs. Donna Lake.
Good evening, thank you. And happy birthday, Mr. DiNardo.
Thanks.
My name is Donna Lake. I'm at 5407 Mount Crest Drive in Norwood, but I'm here on behalf of ASAP Norwood to introduce the results of the park audit, which was done. In the fall of 2019, Norwood was selected for the Community Collaborative Learning Grant, which was a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation program awarded to the Health Collaborative. And it was called Healthy Places by Design. Kate Wetzel and I, along with 8 other neighbors, including Mr. Miracle and Mr. Kelsch, partnered with the residents in Covington to determine a project to improve our city. And building upon the 2019 Quality of Life Community Agreement, we prioritized our parks and selected an audit tool. We went through several iterations of what had been out there and kind of tailored it to our own need for Norwood. And everybody on that group was a part of that, honing down exactly what we wanted to find out from our park audit. In fall of 2020, ASAP Norwood, managed by the Health Path Foundation, recruited residents to visit our parks and assess what they saw. The conditions, access, lighting, playground equipment, anything that was on this assessment. We want to thank each person who audited a park. We had a minimum of 5 people look at all parks. We divided some of the parks into different sections, so Millcrest at one point in time was divided into 3 because it's such a big area. We had 15 different areas that we looked at, and there was a minimum of 5 people who assessed each park, including youth from Norwood Middle School and High School. So I want to thank, as you can imagine, there was a lot of data, and I tried, without very good luck, trying to assimilate that data into something that was readable and was usable for you to understand. But we enlisted Xavier University students Tia Ellison, Jay McDonald, and Molly Parker, and they entered the raw data into the computer. The Gem of the Highlands 5K and Norwood together provided financial support for expert analysis and tonight's presentation that you will see. We are pleased to hear from Rosie Santos, who is a certified park and recreation professional who had worked with the city of Covington. Their park system is amazing over there. And Covington learned, it was a collaborative learning process, and Covington learned from us about how to deal with tobacco issues in youth. But it was through our collaborative with Covington that we met Rosie Santos, again, a certified park and recreation professional. And she has a presentation of our findings and recommendations to the City of Norwood park systems that she wants to share with you. So I will turn this over to Rosie.
Thank you.
First of all, is this on? Can you hear me?
For the people at home, like there's...
For the people at home,
broadcast.
okay. Are you all comfortable if I remove my mask so I can project more clearly? Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Donna, and I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. As you heard, there was a lot of work done prior to us coming on board to help bring it across the finish line to you. And I just want to thank all of the volunteers and the community stakeholders that have been involved in the process to get us to this point. So what I'm going to share with you tonight are a few slides that are just an overview of what will be over a 50-page document of both the current conditions as well as some preliminary recommendations for improvements to Norwood's park system. So you can advance slides. All right. So Donna kind of outlined a little bit of where things were when we started. My collaborator, Abby King, still works for the city of Covington, and I recently left the city. I'm with Great Parks now, but we collaborated on this project, and our role was to, we took the site visit data that the volunteers compiled, and we did our own site visits. We combined all of that information, and it was thankfully already put into digital form for us, so that made our jobs a little bit easier. And we analyzed the data, and we put together what we are calling a park inventory assessment report for you. So there's an audit that was done, and now you're getting the assessment of that audit material. The assessment will include photos, data, and again, a preliminary analysis, and it will serve as a starting point for prioritization of funding, policies, and planning. I really see this as being a great use to your new staff, your recreation director, as well as the public works staff here. We can go ahead and progress to the next slide. So we condensed, so what we'll go over tonight is a preliminary or a high-level analysis of the parks. The report will include in-depth details about each park. I'm just going to give you kind of the bullet point highlights so we don't spend too much time here. We will also talk about prevention through environmental design and some of the key findings of our analysis and next steps. All right. Wait, edit this. It's always exciting. Okay. All right, so this is the highlights of the data. You have 11 parks. You have 4 soccer fields, 8 baseball and softball fields. You have 1 sand volleyball court, 4 tennis courts, 4 basketball courts. Hunter is missing rims, so it's not an active basketball court there. Only 2 of your parks have grills. You don't have dog waste stations, so that's like an area that provides dog bags for dog walkers in parks. You have a total of 13 playground units. And so again, the condition data was based on an aggregated total of the volunteers' assessments of condition. So this is based on their opinion. And then we also factored in our professional analysis into these ratings. So from that analysis, 31% of those playgrounds were rated as poor condition. And one of the primary reasons was related to play surfacing. So that's the material that goes under the play equipment, engineered wood fiber typically, or you'll see wood chips in some parks. 77% of your playground units have inadequate playground surfacing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. 83% of parks have restrooms. Linder and Victory were the only two restrooms that were rated as good. 60% were rated poor or fair. 50% of the parks were missing signage, rule signage specifically. 67 had quality shade structures. That's one of the greatest assets that from us on the outside coming in. There's a lot of shade structures in your park, which is not very common in urban park systems. 30% of shelters were rated good to very good. That's also pretty good news. 92% were rated having poor lighting, and 34% would have less than 25%. 34% of parks have less than 25% tree canopy cover. All right, so this is a bunch of numbers. Probably doesn't mean much. Let's dig a little bit deeper into what this means for Norwood. So one of the things that we did was we categorized the parks in your inventory as either local, neighborhood, regional, or special purpose. Your local parks are going to be those that are smaller in scale, and they serve people within walking distance. So they don't necessarily have anything that attracts people from Cincinnati at large, or even maybe other neighborhoods within Norwood. It's for the folks that are on the block. Those include Burwood, Fenwick, Hunter, Marsh Avenue, and Northwoods. Some of the overall key features of the parks in this category is outdated equipment, insufficient play surfacing, and poor visibility. 40% had poor visibility. Overall recommendations for these parks. One of the most important things is going to be to prioritize maintenance and capital investment in the parks that do have high visibility. And when I say visibility, what I'm talking about is when you just drive or walk past the park, you can see straight to the other side. A lot of these parks are kind of obscured by trees, or you have to go down a long path at the end of a cul-de-sac, so you can't see into the park. And this relates to crime prevention, and visibility improves the safety and feeling of safety in a park as well. So a recommendation is to certainly look towards decommissioning outdated equipment, and potentially reconsidering how you're investing your maintenance, your labor into the low visibility parks. If there's a park that you want to enhance in one of these low visibility areas, picking an asset that the community says we really want this, like a dog park where people are going to be going out of their way to go there, could improve safety because you have more folks coming to that park from outside of the neighborhood. One of the primary recommendations overall for any park that has a playground, and many of your local parks do have playgrounds, is to follow ASTM's safety standards for playground surfacing. And I'll talk again. I'll talk about recommendations for how the staff can do some auditing annually towards the end here that will help keep you on track for making sure you don't get to the point where you have a significant safety issue with a lack of surfacing on playgrounds again. Something else that we're seeing a lot in smaller parks across the nation is moving away from built facilities in general, concessions and restroom facilities in small parks, and moving towards portable amenities such as portalettes or food trucks. One of the primary reasons is there was a lot of infrastructure built in the 90s, and we just don't have the capital maintenance to maintain those. That doesn't mean that you do away with restrooms everywhere. That doesn't mean that you do away with concessions everywhere. It just means that you want to prioritize where you build or where you update facilities, as opposed to just trying to have a shotgun approach of having it in every single park. So local parks may not be the best location for those types of amenities. We progress to neighborhood park. So Millcrest was the only park that fit the bill for what we are calling neighborhood park. So it's a small to medium-sized park that serves Norwood residents within driving distance. You're likely serving folks within a 5 to 10 minute commute. This is a really lovely park, and definitely one that we would recommend further investment and updating. One thing that's really nice about this park is the contiguous or connected wooded park areas. There might be some opportunities for trails in this park. Again, you have the same issue of aging facilities and play structures and the same issues with play surfacing at the playgrounds in this park. There's definitely a need for some natural resource management, and again, I mentioned the possibility of trail or walking paths in this park. So if you're making a decision about how you're going to spend labor, dollars, time, and resources, it may come down to weighing whether a local park stays in service or maybe changes in function a little bit. Maybe it becomes a more naturalized space. So you take out some of the developed areas, and maybe it just becomes a passive nature path or a passive prairie. And then you can really prioritize your time and energy towards a park like Millcross that's going to serve more people, it's going to be higher visibility, and it's a higher investment opportunity for you. If you can progress to the next slide for me. This is your regional park. This is Lindner. So this park has potential to attract users from outside of the neighborhood. So this could be a park of interest to people across the tri-state. It's a beautiful asset. It has lots of unique character. Compared to some of the other parks, its developed areas are very well maintained. What this park needs is investment in its natural resources, its natural areas, definitely trail maintenance support. I understand somebody from the Great Parks team actually came out and did an assessment on the trails there. I would continue to lean into those regional partnerships. There may be funding collaborators at this site to really boost some of those efforts. Interpretive or nature programming would be a big hit at this park. And overall, I would really look to this one for private investment. I think folks would be interested in giving money to this park. And then finally, our special purpose parks. So 4 parks fit into this category. So this is a niche or unique feature park. So this includes athletic fields, aquatics, or other specialized usage. So Doral Field, Victory, Water Tower, and Waterworks. And the reason why the Water Tower made it into this category instead of the local category is it's so specific. It's so uniquely Norwood, and it is a small park, but it has some historic interest to it. Again, it's one that I would recommend using maintenance where possible, just because it doesn't have necessarily the broad appeal that, let's say, a Waterworks would have, but it is still categorized as special purpose because of its niche and unique feature. So overall, there's a lot of diversity in the types of assets that you have in this category. You have something like Water Tower, as well as athletic facilities. Fair maintenance condition in these parks, so that is, they're often, what we found is these parks were in better shape than some of the local parks. The facilities, some are aging. That's not universally true for all. Some have very recent investment. Parks with playgrounds, again, still have some play surfacing issues. Again, not across the board an issue in this category, but there was still some that we found. Waterworks has the highest quality athletic facilities. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. That was probably known. And Victory is your highest visibility park for non-residents because of its location in the commercial district. So there's an opportunity for placemaking with this park, and also potentially economic development if leveraged. So just things to consider for parks in that category overall. And then we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, that's a duplicate. Strategic prevention and environmental design. So one of the overall recommendations in our report is going to be to consider how to change or adapt as you think about reinvesting in your park spaces over the next decade or more. How to change the physical design or structure to reduce risk and enhance protection. The photo that you're seeing here is from Corvallis, Oregon. So it's kind of hard to see on this screen, but the idea is that you place physical features, activities, and people via programming to maximize visibility. In this space, you have kind of a circular seating area, so it's a well-defined space that's inviting. There's distinction in the pavement between like a normal sidewalk. So it suggests like this is a public space that is intended to be activated and occupied. You have intentional landscaping and lighting in these spaces. You have an intentional entrance and exit. You're using fencing and landscaping to make it an inviting space. And so this is what I'm talking, you can't, I'm assuming, like most small cities, you don't have the resources to do this in every single park, right? It's not realistic. But then being really intentional and strategic about where you do this so that when people think of Norwood parks, this is what they think of. And design is just one piece of the prevention pie, of the puzzle. Ongoing programming, policy, and maintenance are going to be necessary to ensure that the park is a hub of community vitality. Okay, last big information slide. Key findings. So the 4 key findings, and it's itty bitty text here. So I know you'll all be excited to read your assessment report because it's all going to be in there too. The 4 key findings was addressing safety, developing baseline standards, maintenance improvements, and maximizing your investment. So again, just to touch back on the safety piece, the play surfacing. There is a certification that's offered through the National Recreation and Park Association called Certified Playground Safety Inspector. There is a fee to put a staff person through that training. I would highly recommend it. You could outsource that, you could contract that service, but I would recommend doing an annual safety audit, and you're going to save money in the long run if you can invest in a staff person to go through that. And that person will be able to, number one, identify issues on an annual basis so that they can get resolved more quickly. And with the play surfacing issue, it's a huge liability, it's a huge risk. So it's definitely something to invest in. The other thing is we noticed this pattern of old playgrounds not being removed when new playgrounds were going in. So you'd have a really old play structure next to a nice new one, and the old one wouldn't have play surfacing and the new one would. I think that there's this fear of taking things away, afraid that the public's going to have a reaction to that. But when you're putting in new infrastructure, it's a really great opportunity to remove outdated facilities. And it's even better if you can remove those and redesign a little bit so that you can make an ordeal out of reopening the park. It's the same park, it's just got a new playground. So that's going to help with safety. That also ties into maintenance and investment as well. Baseline standards are going to be essentially an internal policy document that's going to guide recommendations for officials and your stakeholders. So some examples, I mentioned that tree canopy statistic, the 25% coverage. The reason why trees in parks matters is they provide shade, right? And they can counteract heat island effect. So the national recommendation is 40% coverage, and you're at 25. Cincinnati set the goal of 40%. They're trying to reach national standards. So your baseline standards for Norwoods, for parks, could set that goal. And you might not get there overnight, but then it directs kind of your maintenance and your programming and your public events. You could do more tree plantings, get grants for trees. So that's kind of how that document would work in practice. The other thing it could do is establish specifications for what amenities you use. Are you going with wood trash cans, stadium cans, steel cans? What kind of signs are you using? This document can include all of those standards so that you're consistent across the parks. And then you can account for things like what's going to be the lowest cost in long-term maintenance in the assets that we're selecting. What's our preferred manufacturer? And that information would be useful for Clint and Phil in their work. I'm going to take a sip here. Okay, maintenance improvements. There's a theory in urban planning called broken window theory. And the basic idea is, this is the same slide, just another bullet. The idea being, if a space doesn't look like it's being maintained, it's more likely that that space isn't going to be respected in the way that it's intended to be. So maintenance is of the utmost importance. Obviously, your capacity for park maintenance specifically is low. And so I'm not, by any stretch, throwing Clint under the bus. I talked to him about having 3 folks dedicated do maintenance for as many parks as in your inventory, it's just impossible for them to keep these parks up to a particular standard when they've got so much work to do and there's so many other priorities around the city. And that just, again, goes back to prioritization. And only build what you can maintain. So you all are making decisions about where money's invested in the park, and staff are just having to respond to that. But think about the maintenance point of view as you're putting new things in the ground too. Only build what you can maintain, and identify opportunities to streamline or reduce maintenance as you're thinking about building new and exciting things. Like, both are important. And finally, maximizing investment. So having a strategy matters, prioritizing matters. One of the things that we did in Covington that was hugely helpful both for fundraising but also for prioritizing work and budgeting was to develop a tool we called a Park Potential Index, and we looked at which parks have the most potential for X, Y, and Z. We looked at economic development opportunities, partnership opportunities. We looked at the condition of the park. All of these things were factored in, and then it was like a 10-year redevelopment schedule for us. And we just worked through that list and then revisited that list continually. And while we were doing our big projects, like our capital projects, we also had the baselines that we were using to improve the parks that were lower on the list. So we were bringing up all parks to baseline while we were prioritizing our capital investment on our highest potential parks. And as always, taking a community-centered approach is really helpful with parks. The more bought in the public is to your redevelopment, the more likely it is to be a success. There's lots of different strategies for doing that. Having an advisory group, which you have a fledgling advisory group and lots of different folks working on parks across the city, is one way. Doing design charrettes, so involving the public and what goes into the space, can be a huge success as well. All right, that's it for key findings. So in summary, next steps. We will be providing an assessment report to ASAP on the 17th, and that will ultimately come back to the city and Phil and Clint. This park inventory assessment is a starting point for future work for decision making. ASAP Norwood is pursuing grant funding for additional phases and construction projects as well. There's implementation dollars involved. And my understanding is the way that would work is that they would be the funding agent, and then Phil would serve as the project manager. That's the way that we've discussed that. So strategy maximizes your outcomes. It saves time and money and energy in the long run. You don't necessarily need a master plan that's going to sit on the shelf, but you certainly need a strategy for how you're approaching your system overall. These types of smart and expedient planning processes, it builds public trust and it builds funders' trust. They want to know that their gift or their tax dollars are being intentionally used and maintained. And again, future work could include an investment schedule, the baseline standards, standard operating procedures. There's lots of work that could come next. So that's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Quick one. Will part of that inventory also include like a racking and stacking of the parks? Is there, when we heard Dr. Bart, oh my goodness, or Dr. Bartos, struggling with her name. Yes, Bartosik. She talked about how it'd be great as an outcome to get, if we were to go with the strategy, this would probably be tackled first. This would probably be tackled second by a combination of either needs or able to ease of to be done.
Sure.
Is that an outcome that we can see with that inventory?
It certainly, we can just make a recommendation to you. The way that we did it when I was in Covington is we involved the advisory group in ranking those, so that again, there was more buy-in in that process. But I feel like Abby and I have enough data where we could just present you like what we think is the list as an outside looking in.
It might be nice to have.
Okay.
That was something that a few of us on council
Sure.
and the original presentation really latched on to.
Okay.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Kelch?
Yeah, so to further talk about what Mr. Miller was discussing, as mentioned earlier, myself and Mr. Miracle had a hand in starting the tool that went and was able to look at these parks, and that's something that we discussed from that point on.
Yeah.
And I'm a little taken aback because I wasn't involved in the conversation where that changed from, we're going to provide a list, which is our recommendation for you.
Yeah.
As the Parks Committee, and I'm not seeing a lot of involvement with the Parks Committee in this presentation. And this is my first time seeing this, but kind of what we were told at a Parks Committee meeting, and what I was told, and Mr. Miracle was told from the beginning, what we're going to do is kind of create a list, a prioritized list from the worst part to the best part, so that way we can show that to the residents, say, hey, these are the parks we're going to be working on coming up.
Yeah. So, Chris,
That's kind of what
the
we're
data
looking
that
for.
we had was condition. And if that's the only criteria that matters to you
Yeah.
all, we could tell you what the worst condition one is and post that one up on the list.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about with the park's potential goes beyond condition. Is then you have to look at what are economic factors that different parks can, and again, I could make that analysis and that recommendation based on what I'm seeing and include that in the report. I certainly can do that. I think that it would be wise to take a step back and talk about what other criteria are important. The data that you collected was 100% we wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah, well, a
we
lot
don't
of
know
it.
what the condition
Well, what I
is.
would say is a lot of it is being addressed already.
Yeah.
As far as like some of the, we just bought a bunch of mulch for the playground, play
Yeah.
set stuff under there, like that. Some of this information is a little older, which I get that the audits happened. How long ago? 6-9 months ago. 2020. Yeah. So I mean, some of the information is being addressed, but I'm just kind of curious, where does the Parks Committee come in? Because you guys were talking about a Parks Advisory Group or board, whatever that kind of conversation is going towards. But I'm saying, where does the Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces Committee come in as far as this information, planning, coordination, all that stuff? Where do you guys see the Parks Committee and all that?
Good evening, Leslie Stevenson. So I'm the project coordinator for ASAP Norwood, and as a point of clarity, this is phase 1 that Rosie is reporting on, and it was just to analyze the raw data that was provided on conditions. So this is the time when we are sharing so that the next part can actually be a collaboration with other stakeholders, such as the Committee of Council. So we're not saying that's not appropriate. That's just not what this report is
That part wasn't funded.
doing, correct?
Okay, so again, like where do we, because we were talking, you guys obviously see the need possibly for a Parks Advisory Board. Where does that coincide with the Parks Committee? Is that
So
clear?
we haven't, that was just like a high-level recommendation about a community engagement strategy that worked effectively from my experience. That's just a general recommendation. It has not been applied to Norwood in any specific way.
Okay.
To Leslie's point, there absolutely is a future phase of this work that would involve more stakeholders. That just has not been funded. Do you have something to add, Donna?
I just wanted to add that what Covington did and what we found very intriguing with Covington was that they were on like a 3-year plan. Every park had, you chose a park, and the first year you went to the community that was around the park and said, what do you do there? What would you like to do there? What do you see as the potential? The second year was planning, and the third year is when you put it all into action. And so every year, you were dealing with 2 or 3 parks, and you went to those folks like you have done, and I could see the committee holding public, meetings with people in those areas to see not only what our thoughts are, but what the people in the community would see as something that could be used. And then we would apply that to the information we have, maybe the worst park. Do you want to start with the worst park and make it better? Or do you want to start with a good park and have just a short success? That's totally up to you guys. I think what we'd like to see is that the involvement of the neighborhood and kind of a plan on out. So I think we're doing exactly what you what we intended to do, but it's just with COVID, it's just taken so long to get things done. And you're right, some of the parks have been totally upgraded since the audit was done.
Yeah, and I understand it's taken a lot of time, and I mean, we've asked a couple times, I have personally asked a couple times for that, like a list, because I've put together a financing plan that is in the FRP to fund out all the parks for the next 5 years, and I was looking
Right.
for a list to put names
I
on
can
those
give you a
parks.
list.
It's coming.
If you want
That's
to
what
be,
I'm saying.
but
Yeah, it's coming.
that's not funded. I
Well-
mean, like, I can use my professional judgment based on the conditions and the high-level analysis that we did, but I'm hearing that you want to be involved in that prioritization.
Well, it's not that we want to be involved, we're a committee set forth by council, controlled by council, elected by the people, we have to be involved.
Sure. Well, you would approve the list, but I'm saying iteratively in the development
We
of the
would be
list.
involved in the planning process and
Yeah.
project execution and all that stuff is part of our job of being on that committee. And what my questioning was asking, since I am the chair of that committee, was simply where you guys see that committee involved in this process, where it doesn't really seem that involved. It seems more of an advisory board being the lead driver, where we're kind of over here, which just doesn't operate.
Again, it's another point of clarity. I'm going to speak on behalf of ASAP. I don't want Rosie to take ownership for that. The next step, when it gets funded, will be these collaborative conversations. This is the information that's been analyzed based on what's in the park. There's been no plans made. I would like to, as a point of clarity, share, we did write a grant so that we could have an expert work with the stakeholders of the city. It hasn't been funded, but there costs money to have a consultant like Rosie. We've resourced from the community. She already mentioned the partners who have paid for that, and that's the end of the project right now.
Yeah.
So
Well, and-
there's not been a misstep, just as a point of clarity. There's now clarity on how many steps are involved, and for the amount of funding and the amount of assessment that had taken place, we now have this report that should come to you by the 17th.
Well, in the future, can I ask for, more clarity for everybody to have a commitment that some of these things will be presented at our Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces Committee meeting before being presented at council where we see this for the first time, and can we commit to that?
The way that the meetings were scheduled, this was the soonest the information was available, and we chose to share it as soon as possible. It wasn't to sidestep a committee, it was to get it out to the public. You all are definitely part of that group, but there are a lot of people watching who are also involved, and so that's why we chose to utilize this time.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We have other hands up here. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. First off, I just want to say, this is just the line of questioning that's happening right now is a continuation of what's happened before, in the sense that people are trying to do good things for the city. ASAP Norwood has gone out and gotten funding. We have Rosie here, professional consultant, and they've chosen to come to bring to council this recommendation. And yet we consistently, this has happened in the past too, it's not good enough. It's like where people are volunteering and doing their work, and then all of a sudden the people on council believe that it has to follow exactly what their image is. We don't have to follow any of these recommendations. Are just recommendations. We don't have to follow any of them. Like, they're presenting them to us, and I personally think that a lot of the information here is newer ways to think about the park. So of course it's informational for me, so I'm looking forward to getting the final report. But I just want to encourage us all, making demands to people that we're not funding the stuff, that we're not funding this report. We didn't give any dollars to it, but I feel like it's just rude. So I would just encourage us to rethink that. I think that if the Parks Committee wants to take up these recommendations and then go talk about them, that's fine. That's great. But to be upset because they didn't go to the Parks Committee first, they just presented to council and to the community, I think that's wrong. And the other thing is, we were talking about the execution of things being a council purview, and it's not. Council's purview is to give funding, approve contracts, but it's the city administration actually administers the contracts and sees it to completion. And so I think this council has had a history of overstepping its bounds at times and stuff like that. And I think that we need to defer to the administration who's actually going to get these projects done.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsel. Mr. Tracy?
I hate being the bad guy all the time. This is the second time that I know of ASAP stepping around committees and councils. I made it known the first time, and this is now the second time that it has happened. This should have been presented in a committee meeting so that we could sit down and discuss it, not at a large council meeting to where you have 20 and 30 questions. I can sit here and ask about 20 or 30 questions if I want to regarding it. It's great that we have an expert here. However, I can tell you back when Ms. Bartosek was here in the committee meeting talking, I mentioned broken windows theory. Everything that was said, nothing against you, was said in committee meetings. So a lot of it wasn't coming out as new information, to be honest. It just put numbers with that information, which is great. That's awesome. Things like canopy. How do you decide canopy? How tall are the trees? A canopy has to have a height. So, you know, where do you determine height? Where do you determine canopy? Because I can go out and plant 10 trees and call it a canopy. So, you know, again, this is something that needs to be taken to the committee for further discussion.
Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. I take it your first name is Rosie. I didn't write your name down. Is your first name Rosie? What's your last name, ma'am?
Santos?
Santos. Ms. Santos, thank you for coming here today. As somebody who visited these parks, I've just turned 50 in April, and I've used these parks, and I've enjoyed these parks, and I've coached football, basketball, baseball, soccer, all in these parks, and I've never seen anybody, a group, delve so far into the planning, and I know perfect planning prevents poor performance, and I am so grateful for you, and you are working with two fine women here today, Miss Lake and Miss Stevenson's. I appreciate everything you put in. I cannot believe the arrogance that's coming from this committee. We have people that are putting their time and their effort and money in helping this community, and we are as arrogant to come off like they have to report. They have no reason to report to anybody here. That is so arrogant. Thank you for your time and your effort, and I appreciate every ounce of it. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Just kind of echo what Mr. Braden said, but very much appreciate the work that you've done and the work that ASAP has done, and that they've gone out and found experts to do this. And I want to apologize that people on this council don't actually understand how community involvement works sometimes.
Mr.
But with I'm talking,
meeting.
excuse me.
I don't care.
Mr. Kelch, Mr. Kelch.
Point
Point of order. Mr. Thompson has the floor. Please stop talking. Mr. Thompson, continue.
As I said, I'm sorry that there are people on this council that don't understand how sometimes you have to work with the community. ASAP is not required to go to any committee before they present the information, or they're required to come to here to present the information. You're a community group. You're able to go and research what you want to, fund what you want to, present what you want to. Thank you for coming and presenting this. As a council and as a committee, on the Parks Committee, I suggest that we take this information and maybe do something with it. That's actually when committees do something.
Yeah.
But they're under no, they don't have to have us do things. This is just something that we're doing. So the attacks against them are silly, and put your hand down. You've said enough.
No, I haven't. Thank you.
Point of order.
I'm still talking, so.
Mr. Thompson, please continue.
You know, it's just, please, I want to hear what you have to say.
Let's try and wrap up the comments. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm being painted in a horrible light here when I'm just trying to ask that my committee that I chair be involved, that you are on, that Mr. Narda's on, Mr. Tracy's on. That's all I'm asking. I ask if they see us in the future of their plans. I asked that a couple times. I said, where do they see us in the future of that? All I'm asking is that our committee's involved. I'm asking. I'm not requesting anybody. So I'm a little embarrassed that I'm being attacked. I feel like it is attack towards me, that I'm asking those questions for our committee to be involved, so we can consider certain things, so we can do things. Mr. Thompson.
In response?
Moving
Please.
forward, just
Please.
council rules, I will. Council rules state all questions and comments are to the chair, so let's remember that, please, and no personalities. Mr. Thompson.
I would just want to say that the way that you put it into committee is the new business, that you put this into committee. That's how it works.
Thank you. Mr. Tracy.
Through the chair, I don't appreciate your comments either, Mr. Thompson, because, you know, you're painting us in a light that we're some sort of monarch here, you know, we're a dictatorship. We're not. The money has to come through us, okay? We can't just have ASAP going out and painting sidewalks and painting basketball courts without coming through and checking. They're public properties. They're public stuff. We can't just have people going out and planting trees willy-nilly wherever they want. That's the point. Yes, it is public. Yes, it is part of the citizens. However, we have set up a structure in a way to spend the money in a certain way. And that's why it needs to go through committee. This is absolutely ridiculous that, I mean, why do we have committees? Why? If we're just going to do an end around and go through the back door.
Mrs.
Miracle, may I just point out, since we keep referring to the basketball courts and how we painted the basketball courts on our own, that was approved by the previous administration, by the previous committee. You were not a part of that committee. You were not a part of the previous administration. ASAP Norwood secured $75,000 to do those basketball courts that the previous administration approved and the previous councils approved. So I'm sorry that you were not a part of it, but for you to continue to say that that was not brought through the city is absolutely incorrect, and I just need to establish that right now. And despite the fact that some people didn't like it, those basketball courts are being used constantly, and there has been no problem. Thank you. I'm going to leave, and it has nothing to do with the conversation on here. My son is in from Denver, and I think my time would be better spent with him. Thank you for listening to me tonight. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Slate. Thank you, Mrs. Santos, Stevenson, Ms. Slate, for your presentation. We have two requests to address council this evening. The first one is Deborah Meyer. Please come forward. I'm going to be monitoring, it's 5 minutes. At 30 seconds, I will tell you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so my name is Deborah Meyer, and I am the owner of the Mosquito Joe franchise that services the greater Cincinnati area and the northern Kentucky area. And I understand that a Norwood resident has raised some concerns about mosquito spraying, not only by my company, but other companies in the area. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to come and tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do locally and nationally to try to protect the citizens of the communities that we service and that we also live in. So just in general, Mosquito Joe, we eliminate outdoor pests. We hope to bring health and happiness to families and pets in all of the communities that we service. Mosquito Joe has been in business for over 9 years with over 350 franchises nationwide. In 2020, we actually serviced 1,353,000 customers with no reported incidents of illness to any person or pet. Mosquito Joe also enjoys the distinction of being ranked the #1 franchise in category in Entrepreneur's Franchise 100 for the year 2020, as well as recognition from the Franchise Business Review, Franchise Times, and the International Franchise Association. Mosquito Joe is also part of the Neighborly family, which includes other distinguished brands such as Molly Maid and Window Jenny. And in total, the Neighborly family services over 10 million customers in 9 different countries. That's a little bit about the national. I opened my franchise 5 years ago. It was just me and my family operating it out of our home up in Maineville. And I'm proud to say that by the end of 2020 last year, this franchise was the #1 franchise in total customers and in new customers in the entire United States. What we do to try to protect our communities, Mosquito Joe is part of the Pesticide Environmental Stewardship Program. This program is an elite partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency. It was established in 1994 and is the only federal stewardship organization that engages commercial, private, and public users of pesticides to reduce risk and seek alternate treatment methods. Through this program, Mosquito Joe has pledged to use environmentally conscious processes and products through our integrated pest management techniques. Our trained technicians use products approved and tested by the Environmental Protection Agency. We have 2 urban entomologists on staff, and I locally work closely with the entomology department at the Ohio State University. We are also part of the Pollinator Protection Management Plan. Through this program, we educate and train our technicians to identify flowering plants, gardens, and bee boxes. We make certain to stay at least 10 feet from these areas or use only bee-friendly products with beekeepers, and we do have several beekeepers as customers. We're also in the midst of a 5-year training program to acquire the Quality Pro Mark of Excellence. Quality Pro accredits and certifies pest management companies that use superior standards even to the national and state regulations. The Quality Pro uses a task force of representatives from the National Pest Management Association, the Centers for Disease Control, the American Mosquito Control Association, the Entomological Society of America, and the National Environmental Health Association. It also utilizes input from various vector control districts. One of the reasons is because mosquitoes are a vector of many diseases that can inflict harm to human beings. So a vector is any arthropod, actually insect, rodent, or other animal capable of harboring or transmitting the causative agents of human disease. So mosquitoes, unfortunately, being a vector of many known debilitating and sometimes fatal diseases. In the United States, West Nile, dengue fever, and Zika are the most common, with several cases of West Nile reported right here in Hamilton County, Warren County, and Butler counties annually. Ticks also carry diseases such as Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, those 2 being the most common, and unfortunately, they are very much on the rise in the state of Ohio. As you may know, these diseases can lead to a myriad of painful symptoms and sometimes long-term health issues. Diseases such as West Nile can lead to encephalitis and meningitis. Recovery can take several weeks to months. Some effects to the central nervous system can be permanent, and unfortunately, about 1 out of 10 people who contract West Nile disease die. At Mosquito Joe, we don't like to tread on fear. We don't market towards fear. We much rather make our customers' backyards happy and fun, where they can pursue their hobbies and where they can play. I'm proud to say that in the city of Norwood, we have 148 customers who enjoy our services. Many have been customers for several years, and we would really hate to lose those customers as well as the other Norwood residents, so they would lose out on the benefits of our service.
Thank you, Mrs. Meyer. That's your time.
Thank you.
Our next request is Pastor Sonny James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. I first want to continue to send prayers up for families that are still dealing with the horrific pandemic. You know, my wife's family alone has had 4 individuals of recent with the COVID, and this recent week 2 of my own church members. And so our prayers go out to all of them. You know, Mr. Geraci said, you know, I don't want to always look like the bad guy. You know, I really don't care how I look. Because I know people that look like me have died, literally died, that I might have the rights and privileges to stand before each and every one of you. In fact, I remember years ago saying before council, President Barack Obama could be the President of the United States of Ohio, but if he were to come to Norwood, he'd be very, very lucky to get any job. Because as you can see tonight, No, I'm not always about fighting. Recently, I was attacked by a raccoon and had to handle that. So I'm a little bit sore, but sometimes you have to be willing to fight. I think most of you know that I don't shy down from a fight, not even from an angry, big, giant raccoon. But guys, what I want to share with you is, I know that the thing with George Floyd is kind of winding down, but systemic racism is not just a bunch of racist people who get on a podium and say, I hate black people. Systemic racism starts with a mindset. And just look tonight. Doesn't matter what side you're on. I just recently saw my son be named in an opportunity in Norwood to be on the very first chronic nuisance board. And he didn't make it. But I'm very proud of the committee that worked tirelessly to go over all options. And just because he didn't make it, I'm not disappointed at all. I want to take my hat off to Mr. Kelch, Mr. Geraci, and those that worked tirelessly with that committee. Listen, black people aren't saying, I want to be the one. I mean, just look at our administration. Many times our administration tries to go so far around, and you might say, well, Pastor, you're not telling the truth. Yes, I am. Look at our local YMCA. We can talk about bringing karate classes in there, but the only black tenant for years of the YMCA, no one on that committee has even said, Pastor, you've personally put thousands of dollars into that building as a tenant. Would you like to continue having your church meet there? Not one person. And what you saw tonight, I know none of you are going to talk bad to me. I pray not. But what you saw tonight is someone just asking a question. And that's what I've been doing for years here. And instead of addressing it so that we can agree to disagree but move forward, we throw out insults upon one another. And we challenge each other. Guys, I just want this community to be the absolute best loved community in the country. But we still very much have systemic protocols that keep us divided. And I'm sorry to say, our administration has got to become more open. I'm not talking about just putting blacks on a committee. Oh, of course, blacks that don't really know the history, blacks that haven't been pushed out, blacks that haven't been included in on the table. It's a shame when I have to now lean to national figures to sit down at the table to listen. Guys, let's stop. Let's work together. And if a committee is involved in an area, let's bring each other to the table so that we eliminate offenses. God bless you all. I pray that I can continue to heal from that raccoon attack, but I'm ready for round 2. God bless you all. Just give everybody a chance. And the systemic racism starts with a mindset, and we can do better. God bless you all. And good job to that committee. Great 3 choices. I'm proud of you guys.
Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council, Housing, Health, and Public Safety report for May 4th, 2021 and April 13th, 21.
The Committee of the Housing, Health, and Public Safety, date 4/13/21. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom was referred discussion of Airbnb, discussion with the Building Department, discussion regarding group homes, and the Chronic Nuisance Task Force. Discussion on Airbnb was just regarding an issue of possibly adding them to the hotel tax. Still doing research and will possibly discuss in the future. Building department said there was nothing that could be done at the Regent residence. Ordinance is already on the books, reference group homes, so no further at this time regarding that. The task force briefly spoke regarding roles and tracking. Respectfully submitted, Matthew Geraci, chairperson, Mr. Michael Gabbard, Mr. Chris Kelch, and Mr. James Bonzel.
Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we receive and file this committee report.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to receive and file. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mr. Geraci.
Committee report, Housing, Health, and Public Safety, 5/4 of 2021, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom it was referred, the meet and greet, the Appeals Board members, discuss the next steps of the Appeals Board, discuss the feeding of animals outside. Met all three members of the Appeals Board, introductions were made and questions were taken. Next steps will be formally sent, will formally set process for tracking and notification. Animal feeding ordinance. It was decided to report out to council. However, I am going to, at this time, place that back into Housing, Health, and Public Safety for a modification of text. So that will not be reported out to council. It'll go back to Housing, Health, and Public Safety. Respectfully submitted, Matthew Geraci, chairperson, Mr. Michael Gabbard, Mr. Chris Kelch, and Mr. James Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we receive and file this committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Mr. DiNardo.
I'd like to second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to Committee of the Whole report, May 4, 2021. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred, discussion on accounting methods report and discussion on the police body cameras and system update. Committee of the Whole met on Tuesday, May the 4th, 2021. All council members were present. Additionally, Mayor Schneider, Treasurer Tim Maloney, Auditor Jim Stith, Law Director Keith Moore, and Chief Kramer were in attendance as well. The first item to be discussed was a discussion on police body cameras and the system update. Councilman Thompson asked Chief Kramer to update council. Chief Kramer remarked that we currently use WatchGuard and have difficulty with the server. There are requests from Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office for body camera footage, and it takes considerable time. Chief Kramer would like to switch to Taser, which stores in the cloud and would give access to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office. The cost is $136,000 with 24 cameras for 5 years. There is not much difference cost between WatchGuard and Taser. Chief Kramer will review the cruiser cams and the associated cost. The second item of discussion was the accounting methods report. As a group, we reviewed all 31 open items. Mr. Maloney reviewed all items associated with the Treasurer's Office. Mr. Stith reviewed all items associated with the Auditor's Office, as well as Mr. Moore addressing items associated with the Law Department. I provided a copy of Oxford's financial policy, Painville's financial policy, and a spreadsheet I created with all 34 items and shared with the State Auditor's Office. Mr. Maloney suggested an additional column on the spreadsheet as completed, waiting on approval. Moving forward, we will have updates from everyone, including the State Auditor's Office, prior to the FRP meeting on June 22nd. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle, Chairperson. Mr. DiNardo.
I move that we file.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Thompson. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. We will move on to item J, third reading of ordinance and resolutions. Item J1, an ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood to enter into community reinvestment area agreements with Playing Card Partners LLC, authorizing the city to enter into a related school compensation with Norwood City School District, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have the third reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to have the third reading. Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my understanding that the school district approved their portion of this before our meeting tonight. And I was just hoping we'd hear from either Pat or Andy, maybe Pat, I don't know. Yeah, and then also Amber Ballard, the school board members here as well. Yeah, if we could just hear and kind of just hear what happened, and, just to get confirmation that we're ready to move forward on this ordinance.
Yeah, so if you recall, both with respect to the CRA exemption and the TIF exemption and obligation to make payments, there was a need for school district to approve a compensation arrangement. But it seems like both of you guys know more about it than I do. Yes, I'll let them give the details of it. But basically, the school board did unanimously approve it, and so we are able to at least consider it. Obviously, and the approval was dependent upon them approving it prior to your consideration and approval of it. So that step, that hurdle has been crossed or overcome, I guess. Sounds negative. But so I think that it was positive and everybody's on board, ready to move forward. But again, if you guys want to...
I want to steal any thunder, so... Hello, thanks for hearing from me. For those at home, my name is Amber Ballard. I serve as Vice President on the school board. We did vote unanimously tonight to approve this agreement. We are absolutely excited about the possibilities that are coming with this new development and the relationship of approving a document between the city and the school district in a positive way. It's just the mark of a new era for our city to be able to work together in this capacity. So thank you guys for the excellent work that you have done in committee, and to all the people, you guys who have put in the time and the research and the numbers that I definitely cannot do myself. For numbers, I would definitely defer to him, but thank you guys so much for your consideration and your work on this project together. Thank you.
Thank you.
I gotta say something since I'm standing up here. I just, to the school district, they were great to work with, their whole staff, and it was a great relationship. And in terms of what they said tonight, I'll echo that again. They had nothing but great things to say about the city and the process and how this was handled. And I'm very excited for the development and what the potential is for the city. So, any other questions that you may have?
Thank you.
I was just going to say, as a little bit of background, because we have a couple things tonight in connection with this, as I sort of referenced, the CRA, which is the tax exemption for 15 years, we do have a third reading of that tonight. We also have a TIF exemption. That also required prior approval of the school board. That is the first reading of it. We'd asked if you are amenable to doing all three readings of that and approving it, but that is not as important, I would say, to the developer right now in order for them to move forward. But considering the time we put into it and the discussion we've had about it, if you'd like to sort of have that as one discussion to prove it, that's an option, but I want to respect the process that you prefer, and that's not always your preferred way of doing things, so I'll defer to your discussion on that, but just to put that out there, because they are sort of interlinked, and happy to discuss the CRA and the TIF, the CRA individually first, or go back over anything, or however you'd like to talk about it, if there are any remaining questions in connection with where we are in this process with this project.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have any questions for you, sir, but I just wanted to thank Ms. Ballard for coming here tonight and communicating that with us. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I kind of want to echo just all the statements that were made about the relationship between the school district and the city. From my understanding, the school district's been very happy with the increased communication. I was told at the board meeting tonight that it was just very positive all around by the school board members that were there. So I just say kudos to everybody involved, Pat, Andy, and the administration for kind of helping to foster that relationship, because I think we all kind of know that we can't just be a strong city without a strong school district. So having them on board and ensuring that, the school district has the funding that they need as well is important. So just want to say kudos to everybody all around.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Item J1, an ordinance authorizing, wait, I already did that.
Yes, we have the third reading.
We have the third reading.
Motion on the floor.
We have the motion on the floor. It's Mr. Bonzel and Mr. Thompson. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
An ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood to enter into community reinvestment area agreements with Playing Card Partners, LLC, authorizing the city to enter into a related school compensation with the Norwood City School District and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Motion, we pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mr. Braden, pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo?
Yes, please.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L1, introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. L1, resolution declaring June 2021 to be Pride Month in the city of Norwood. Mr. Thompson.
I move we have all three readings with the first in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. To have all three readings, the first in its entirety. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to second.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Thank you. Any discussion? Please. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Resolution declaring June 2021 to be Pride Month in the city of Norwood. Whereas Norwood is home to a diverse and inclusive community, and whereas individuals who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, LGBTQ, include people from all faiths, races, national origins, socioeconomic statuses, education levels, and political beliefs. And whereas LGBTQ people in the United States have made and continue to make vital contributions to the United States and to the world in every aspect, including in the fields of education, law, health, business, science, research, economic development, architecture, law enforcement, healthcare, fashion, sports, government, military, music, film, politics, technology, literature, and civil rights. And whereas on June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in, I'm going to mess this up, Obergefell versus Hodges, 135 Supreme Court 2584, that same-sex couples have a constitutional right to marry and acknowledged that no union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. And whereas LGBTQ people in the United States have fought for equal treatment, dignity, and respect. And whereas LGBTQ people in the United States have achieved significant milestones, ensuring that future generations of the LGBTQ people in the United States will enjoy a more equal and just society. And now therefore, be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, that Section 1, the City of Norwood declares June 2021 as Pride Month to provide an opportunity for our residents to learn about the discrimination and inequality that the LGBTQ community has experienced and continues to experience, and to celebrate the contributions of the LGBTQ community. Resolution declaring June 2021 to be Pride Month in the City of Norwood. Resolution declaring June 2021 to be Pride Month in the City of Norwood.
Mr. Thompson.
Motion that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the resolution. Mr. Gabbard.
Like to second the motion?
No, second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the resolution passes. Moving on to item L2, ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood, Ohio to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have all three readings. Do I have a second? Mr. Braden.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the ordinance be passed.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to pass the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this ordinance specifically, this the Transit Infrastructure Fund, so this was approved with the issue that was approved in the March of 2020 for transit funding for the county, so it's the 0.7% sales tax. So this is basically, there was 30% of it was for road, 70% of it was for transit, so this is giving us the opportunity to apply for some of those road dollars. And the thing about the road dollars is that they have to be on transit routes. So, I'm really hoping we've got two pretty important routes that go through Norwood. There's three routes total, but two that are the most important, I'd say, are the 4 and the Metro Plus. They both go from downtown and take different routes through here and then keep going north. But there's some of the heavier routes ridden. So just know that we should hopefully do pretty well. I would just encourage the administration to look at potentially applying for either signal modernization or some type of way that we can keep traffic moving or more quickly when we get to Montgomery and Norwood Avenues, and where Sinker Boulevard kind of all routes up. Because buses get stuck there just like the rest of us do, and a lot of us know that we can just go around. Well, the bus routes don't really go around, they just stay on the same route. So highly encourage you all to do that. But I think this is a great opportunity. I'm glad that the administration's on top of this, and I'm hoping that we get some dollars either for some paving or for some infrastructure or for traffic light modernization.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $8 million of urban renewal refunding revenue bonds, Series 2021 Linden Point project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, pursuant to Chapter 725 of the Ohio Revised Code, to secure bonds to be issued by the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority for the purpose of refinancing outstanding obligations of the city issued to finance and refinancing the cost of certain public improvements, authorizing the pledge of certain service payments to secure such bonds of the city and Port Authority, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority to facilitate the refinancing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have the first and second readings of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have the first and second reading. Mr. DiNardo?
Second that.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Do we want to get an update from Pat or Andy on this specific one? Or?
Yeah, so we were contemplating potentially passing this ordinance a while ago. We had a couple of things to work out with the existing property. Yes, ma'am?
I'm sorry, can you introduce yourselves again? I know you come all of the time, but I still need names.
I'm going to pull this down if that's all right with you guys. I'm Pat Woodside, and I serve generally as bond counsel for the city.
Thank you.
So these are some bonds that are going to be issued through the Port Authority in order to take advantage of their bond fund, which is additional security for the bonds in order to lower the financing costs, or the interest rate on the bonds. And this is going to refinance an outstanding bond issuance that initially was issued to finance public infrastructure improvements, and then a second installment sale agreement, which is similar to a bond. It's a debt obligation, essentially, that's subordinate to the initial bonds. We're going to refinance both of those outstanding debt obligations here at lower interest rates in order to free up, I guess, hopefully some of the additional TIF revenues that are generated at Linton Point, including the Paycor development. But if you have any questions about that, happy to, yes.
This is going to be a real stupid question. When do these TIFs open up to where we can utilize them?
Well, these were issued under Section 725, which I'm sure you don't care about that number, but it's a little bit different. The TIF revenues that go, or that are derived from a 725 TIF have to go into a fund. That fund can be used to pay debt service on debt obligations that are issued to finance public infrastructure improvements. So we are freeing up that money. There will be additional revenues that we at some point anticipate that, depending on future development, we'll be able to utilize that money for additional public infrastructure improvements at the site. It is a little bit different, and it doesn't just get freed up to use for whatever you want, but that's, it's a healthy TIF. It would depend on what your goals are in that area and what other additional public infrastructure you want to support. But maybe Andy can speak a little bit. But I know this is relative to Cornerstone, for example, where we're trying to alleviate some of the pressure on the TIF due to decreasing property valuation. In this case, we are doing to free up additional money so that future projects can be incentivized.
Andy Brosart with Bradley Payne Advisors. We're the municipal advisor to the city. That TIF district's cash flowing right now, and so there's, I believe, and I don't have the numbers with me, but I think $250,000 a year in cash flow coming off that TIF district. Refinancing this deal will only intensify that, and so, yeah, I think once we get through this, and I think the next step is we've got a report that shows what those cash flows are. So when we finalize the bonds, I think it's in June. When we close this deal. Yeah, I think this deal's in June. Exactly. Cornerstone's closing June 1st. So once we get that finalized, we will resubmit the cash flow projections that show you exactly how much money can be out there in that TIF district.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Tracy?
Would like to sit down with you guys at some point just to kind of go over this TIF information.
Yeah.
I know I probably have a slight inside advantage on it, I guess, but.
Happy to do so. No problem.
Anyone else? Thank you. Mrs. Williams, may we have the first and second read?
An ordinance providing...
Wait a second, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Please call the roll.
We didn't call, sorry. Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am. All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have the first and second reading?
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $8 million of urban renewal refunding revenue bonds, Series 2021 Linden Point Project, of the City of Norwood, Ohio, pursuant to Chapter 725 of the Ohio Revised Code, to secure bonds to be issued by the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority for the purpose of refinancing outstanding obligations of the city issued to finance and refinance the costs of certain public improvements, authorizing a pledge of certain service payments to secure such bonds of the city and Port Authority, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority to facilitate the refinancing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $8 million of urban renewal refunding revenue bonds, Series 2021, Linden Point project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, pursuant to Chapter 725 of the Ohio Revised Code, to secure bonds to be issued by the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority for the purpose of refinancing outstanding obligations of the city, issued to finance and refinance the costs of certain public improvements, authorizing a pledge of certain service payments to secure such bonds of the city and Port Authority, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority to facilitate the refinancing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams.
That's it, since 2 readings.
I did both.
You know, so we just move on to the next item.
Item L4, ordinance repealing ordinance number 2-2011, which was adopted section 15102, titled Application Fees of Codified Ordinance of the City of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Dracy.
I'd like to request 1 reading on this tonight, mainly because I'd like to have a little more information on this prior to doing anything in the future.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to have what? The first reading. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson? Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Geraci?
So this, from what it appears, I think only our police and fire really, at this time, have the application fees. From what I've been told in the past, the application fees is to help assist with paying for the services of the civil service exams that are taken. I do know that some cities do not require an application fee, and I've seen some of the applicants that have come into those tests. I think that this doesn't open up for the best qualified. I think what it does is it forces the best qualified to come in and say, I'm actually going to pay to take the test to be on this department. I'm not a fan of this ordinance. I don't want to see it repealed, to be honest. It's a long-standing fee that is only going to bring in the strongest candidates. If you open it up with no fee, you're not going to bring in the strongest candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Any other discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, I was just hoping that maybe we could hear from our law director just on, if he has any comments on it.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, well, let me just say this. We passed this ordinance in 2011 at a time when the country was in a big recession, and we would give exams for police or for fire, and we'd have 100 people show up, of which maybe 4 were people we were actually interested in hiring, and it was costing a lot of money to give the test. And we were totally broke. So, yeah, we were having trouble paying Duke. So, but things have changed, and I would recommend the council hear from the service safety director who contacted the law department about doing this. I think he's got some updates, some new situation that the council might be interested in hearing.
Mr. Murphy?
President and council members, my understanding, in the competitive field of police and fire, we lose many candidates because very few other places charge a fee to take a test. We have waived the fee a couple of times. Yes, it takes money in, but with the police especially today, we're getting a lot of people that aren't interested because of what the climate for policing today. And to charge them money, whatever amount of money by this ordinance, some good people are going to sit out because they can take many other tests and don't pay anything. It's not a requirement anymore. It's served a purpose, but has outlived its purpose. We want to cast a wide net to get the best candidates for the city on all fronts. But are we missing good people because they don't have money to pay a fee? So I would ask council to really look at that and, what are we getting? I mean, people are driving some distance, and yes, right now I have 1 fire vacancy, 1 police vacancy. The civil service is yet to get the tests ready because now they're looking at lateral entry. So you pay a fee, and the way we're going, we might hopefully give the test soon, because in 30 days I'll start getting grievances because the contracts are not fulfilled. We don't have an active test for either department. They went through their list. I don't recall if the last test given, not in this administration, how many people showed up. I know it used to be hundreds. I'd be surprised today if 20 people show up for our police test, because 7 other departments have done great advertising to get the good candidates way before us. And I don't know if they've charged a fee to take the test. So I would recommend council think about this, and I would suggest you just drop the fee.
Mr. Tracy.
That's kind of why I wanted to have the 1 reading, because I'd like to know how many departments within the county at least do charge or don't charge.
Valid point.
If anything, at least instead of dropping it, instead of charging $25, maybe drop it down to $10. Because again, that best qualified candidate is going to pay that money to go in and take it if they feel that they're going to have an opportunity to be a part of that department. I paid it, I don't know, 7 times between fire and police, assuming that I was going to be one of the better candidates. But so, I mean, it didn't dissuade me from it. I don't know any others that have been dissuaded from the $25. I'm not saying it's bad. I just want a little more research to know how many are charging in our area, how many aren't, what departments they are, because if it's something like Mason, well, I guess it's not in the county, Blue Ash, if Blue Ash isn't charging, then okay, I can see that, because that's a slightly better
I could have the chiefs at council's request check each fire and police chief. I would offer this, that we're hopeful that Mr. Nagley gets the applications ready to post so we can advertise correctly. I don't know a timeline. He has been advised that we've had a fireman leave as of yesterday, and Sergeant Buchanan left the 7th. So I want him to be able to put that on the advertisement if we're going to do that, and if that could be as soon as a month. I could ask tomorrow, what do we think their timeline is? I know the lateral entry was brought up by both chiefs. They want somebody to be able to come into this department on a lateral ranked basis, but this first test will be entry level. So I would ask council to, I will provide what information I can on what departments do fee, offer no fee or a fee. By tomorrow, I'll see that Mr. Tracy gets that, and then you can make a very good decision based on what everybody else is doing.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question to Mr. Murphy through the chair. If we were to approve this tonight, would that speed up the process to get it posted, to get the civil service test done for the police officer and the firefighter that we're short?
I don't know how fast the Civil Service Commission is going to move to get a test. I've been told they have a test in mind that they've used in the past, but I do not know. And from talking to Liz Mize and T.A. Brown and Bernie, how fast that's going to be, because they're still trying to solve lateral entry. If somebody wants to say, come from Blue Ash to Norwood laterally, they still have to take the test, but they want to be able to say lateral entry is accepted, but I don't know.
Follow-up question.
Mr. Bonzo?
So you'd mentioned that we haven't charged the fee, and I talked to Liz Mice today, and she indicated too that she didn't think the fee had been charged recently. So in the last test that we gave, was there a fee charged for the people that took the test?
I would have to check. That was before this administration. I understand it was waived twice, but I don't know if that was a police and a fire, 2 fire, 2 police. I don't know.
Mr. Tracy.
Through the chair, just to kind of piggyback on Mr. Bonzo, I guess. In addition, if you could, those 2 tests that were waived, find out how many people had applied as well.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Geraci, second by Mr. Thompson, to have the first reading. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the first reading?
Ordinance repealing ordinance number 2-2011, which had adopted section 151.02, titled Application Fees of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L5, an ordinance declaring improvements to certain real property within the City of Norwood, Ohio to be public purpose, declaring such property to be exempt from real property taxation, describing the public infrastructure improvements to be made to benefit such real property, requiring annual statutory service payments in lieu of taxes, creating a fund for the deposit of such service payments, authorizing the execution of a service agreement with the owner of such real property, authorizing the execution of a school compensation agreement, and declaring an emergency. Gentlemen?
Wasn't just one? All three.
All three there.
Over there, he's got his hand up. Mr. Braden.
Motion to have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mr. Braden to have all 3 readings. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo. Discussion.
Hello again. So this was the other item that I referenced earlier. We have the CRA, which is the tax exemption that covers the first 15 years of the life of the project. And then the TIF is a similar sort of 2-part exemption. The first part is that it's exempted for an additional 15 years after the CRA, but during that time period, tax revenue on the incremental value of the project is diverted, and we intend to use those funds to pay debt service on bonds that will be used to finance public infrastructure to support the project. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the project at this point and sort of what the plan is. But again, the actual ordinance here, what it does is that it exempts the property from taxation for those 30 years. It then requires the payment of what are called service payments, which are payment in lieu of tax. Those payments in lieu of tax are themselves exempted during the first 15 years, but as I said, this is in order to generate revenue in the future to be used to pay debt service on bonds that will be issued to finance public infrastructure to support the project at the U.S. playing card site.
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Motion by Mr. Braden, second by Mr. DiNardo to have all 3 readings. Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch? Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings?
An ordinance declaring improvements to certain real property within the City of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose, declaring such property to be exempt from real property taxation, describing the public infrastructure improvements to be made to benefit such real property, requiring annual statutory service payments in lieu of taxes, creating a fund for the deposit of such service payments, authorizing the execution of a service agreement with the owner of such real property, authorizing the execution of a school compensation agreement, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance declaring improvements to certain real property within the City of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose, declaring such property to be exempt from real property taxation, describing the public infrastructure improvements to be made to benefit such real property, requiring annual statutory service payments in lieu of taxes, creating a fund for the deposit of such service payments, authorizing the execution of a service agreement with the owner of such real property, authorizing the execution of a school compensation agreement and declaring an emergency. An ordinance declaring improvements to certain real property within the city of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose, declaring such property to be exempt from real property taxation, describing the public infrastructure improvements to be made to benefit such real property, requiring annual statutory service payments in lieu of taxes, creating a fund for the deposit of such service payments, authorizing the execution of a service agreement with the owner of such real property, authorizing the execution of a school compensation agreement, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
May we pass this ordinance, please?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson. Second. Thank you. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you. I'm happy to report that actually the health commissioner did say that during council meetings, if we are all sitting at our seats and we are all spaced away from each other and we're all vaccinated, that we can take our mask off. So in the future, if you want to request and clarify that with the health commissioner, you can clarify that. But at the next meeting, we should not have to wear our mask during the whole meeting since all those parameters have been met. On the other hand, if we're walking out or walking in and all that, or if we're sitting in an audience area close to other members, then of course those people will need to keep their mask on. So that's an important aspect of in the future. We still want to get back to council chambers at City Hall, but there's still a reason to be here. So I'd like to talk just real briefly about the parks audit. I'd like to thank all the individuals involved in the parks audit, all the citizens who went out and spent the time to walk through the parks and audit that equipment and audit what our parks have and what they bring to the community. As I watch that, I sort of, some good, some bad. Nothing new there for all of us. This council and the Parks Committee and the Finance Committee and this council as a whole have committed to improving our parks on many different levels, and you've committed the money and you've committed so much to it. So there's no doubt of the commitment and the energy and the effort that this council is willing to put out to make our parks better. Just all need to work together and make sure we're clearly communicating and all that. And so I just want to thank all the individuals that have been involved in that volunteer time. One of the things that I've talked about with parks is one of the things that they brought up, which is you only build what you can maintain. And there have been people that have came to me and said, we want to do this or we want to do that. And as the mayor, I've said, we've got 11 parks and we've got a full public works department with these guys, but really we only have four guys in the parks department. And then we bring some seasonal guys on, and we have a hard time really maintaining our parks on the level that all of us would like to see our parks on. So that was an important aspect of what she said and what the group came up with, and I totally agree with it. And I agree that we should be pulling old equipment out of the parks at times, and although it's usable, and yeah, we might catch a little grief about taking out maybe a teeter-totter that they were on when they were a kid, but there's some stuff that needs to be done there. So, we have to put steps in place to spend money wisely in our parks, and I think that's what that group is trying to do, and I think that's what the Parks and Playgrounds Committee is trying to do, and the Finance Committee. So we're moving in the right direction, putting tools in place to do it right. We just need to keep, all of us just need to keep communicating, and that's a big part of it. Streets, Indian Mound, Sheridan, Wakefield are all, they're being rehabbed right now. Concrete work's being done. There's a lot of really good work that's taking place in there. Forest from the underpass pretty much up to Sharpsburg went out for bid, and I think the construction pre-con meetings will go on. Robertson, same thing. There's a stretch of Robertson that'll be rehabbed this year. We're looking at what streets to do next year, Regent, Vardaman, Lincoln, Slane, and I know there's been some questions about the engineering study, and I still need to share some information with you guys on the engineering study. But we haven't put all the plans in place for next year yet, and that we're getting close to that. So we definitely, I'll have Safety Service Director Murphy get involved in that, and he's been working with our engineering to try to make sure that we're on the same page there. There's the sort of transit funds that we're looking at doing an application. There's ODOT urban paving projects that we're trying to get some stuff together, and then Clint has, you guys allocated quite a bit of funding in the budget for catch basin repairs and handicapped curb replacement. So there's a lot of work that Clint has sort of in the works there also. So they are moving forward on those capital projects. I attended the committee of the whole meeting, the COW meeting. Somebody asked me, what's a COW meeting? The committee of the whole meeting. And the auditor and the law director and the treasurer were there. It was good to see everybody there. There's some interesting stuff that the president of council is pushing forward. As you guys all know, you were all at the meeting. I think we can move forward quickly on that. The Recreation Task Force team, working with the new Recreation Director, they're working on the branding, the new Recreation Department branding. They are working on events, Friday evenings on the lawn at Victory Park. They've got events planned pretty much through the whole summer for bands and different things going on Friday evenings on the lawn at Victory Park. This weekend on Saturday, from 10 until 12, there's going to be a cleanup at the new Norwood Recreation Building, which we've taken over now, and wear your dirty clothes and come there from 10 until 12, and you can get a good look at that building, and you might have to clean some stuff, but we'll let you walk all around it and clean some stuff. So that's from 10 until 12. We have a project manager that has started working with the city, working with Clint, and working with Safety Service Director Murphy to get projects going and get capital projects going. We've hired a new person in my office that has a background in HR as an HR generalist and as an HR manager, who has already started working on some HR issues that we have and trying to get things squared away. It's been sorely needed for many years, and I'm sure he's going to get us back on track. And then I have interviews that have been going on with a person to work in our building department and work with the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, and we hope to secure a person for that essential work, helping us get the building department stuff going. I know there was discussion also about what the administration looks at using the $3.88 million infrastructure funding, and Clint and others are working on using some of that for our water meter replacement and getting radio read water meter systems in place. So Clint's working on that also, and that's something that the top candidate for this building department manager job has some knowledge about that and has worked in other communities on projects like that. So it'll be interesting to see. Not hired yet, but we're still working on that. So getting some staffing in City Hall to move forward on some projects. I know even the project man, I don't know if he's been involved with the Parks Department yet, or if Clint's pulled him into that stuff, but he'll be involved in some of that park stuff as we make improvements. And I did look at one of the things in the parks thing they were talking about, the surfaces, playing surfaces, and areas around swing sets and all that. And we do have funding. You guys approved funding in the budget for improvements like that. So we'll be making those improvements as we go along. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions or comments? Mr. DiNardo?
Yes, please. It was suggested that we put into Finance Committee a review of the CARES money. Would 2 or 3 weeks be enough time to at least kind of skeleton out a strategy for the rest of the year on that?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ultimately, I talked to the auditor about the money and when it will be coming in and when we can expect it, and he didn't have a good number on that. But the work that Clint has done was started a year ago when he really first got involved. He got started on that stuff. So we have some pretty good information to move quickly. Once funding comes in place, we'd be coming to you guys with plans like that. But to put together a whole plan for that 3.88, yeah, I think that saying within 2 weeks, we should be able to give you something on that, yes.
That'd be useful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Moore?
I would just note that Congress has passed kind of their requirements for that, for the use of that money, but since the money for cities the size of Norwood will have to come through the state will have to pass its own statute on on whatever requirements there are in that. But planning now is a good idea. It's just we don't know the exact parameters as of yet.
Fair point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Gabbard?
Mr. Mayor, I would, speaking of those CARES dollars, one of the areas I'd like for you to consider is technology and the council chambers, upgrading, whether it's the technology to be able to have the, everything filmed and streamed, but also technology to be able to, when we have people come to present, we have technology for that. But I believe this civic clerk is going to be placed into committee of a whole tonight. And with that also would be, maybe going totally digital, so, laptops and everything like that, instead of having all these mounds of paper that we have at every, so just technology, looking at that, I would encourage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Mr. Kels?
If we're talking about the CARES Act money, I'd also like to maybe suggest using a little bit of that for the Elm Avenue project. I know a lot of those residents over there would appreciate any money they can get on moving that project forward.
Thank you, Mr. Kels. Anyone else? Questions or comments for the mayor? Thank you, Mayor Schneider.
Yeah.
Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business this evening? Nothing? Then we'll move on to new business. Is there any new business? Mr. Dracy?
I'd like to try and possibly call a Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee meeting next Tuesday, May 18th, if the members can attend. What's that, 7:30?
What time did you say, Mr. Dracy?
7:30.
7:30?
Down here.
Here at the Community Center. Thank you, Mr. Dracy. Mr. Kelch, did I see your hand up?
Yes.
Will you
On that
finish?
agenda, it'll be insect spray discussion, as well as the feeding of animals outdoors. That was on
Residential parking.
as well as residential parking. I think that still needs to be in the street committee as we discussed, because
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Kelch.
7:30.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to call a Parks, Recreation, Public Spaces Committee meeting if the members of the committee see it as a good date and time for May 19th at 7:30, and we'll go ahead and meet here. And that we would discuss what I'm going to refer to the park audit results. We'll be discussing that at that time.
Thank you, Mr.
So again, I'm
Kelch.
sorry, that's 519 at 7:30 here.
519, 7:30.
Yeah.
Mr. Tracy.
Email you back.
Also a law committee meeting. Try and do it on the same day, May 18th, because I know a couple of the people on the law committee are on the housing committee. Just to discuss a diversion program. I discussed this with Mr. Kelch earlier. We're working on getting additional information in order to present that night.
What time was that?
We'll say 6:30.
6:30?
What day is that?
The 18th. right before the housing.
Anyone else? I'd like to place the civic clerk agenda management system into the committee of the whole, and then I will reach out to you and let you know when we're going to meet the next committee of the whole meeting. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy?
One last one. I'd like a letter be issued to the Safety Service Director if possible, attempting to get a hold of MSD to evaluate several catch basins along Pemberton, Homer.
Along Pemberton, Homer?
Pemberton and Homer.
Okay.
As I went and looked at them, they appear to be collapsed, so they're not catching any water.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Bonds.
Click fix.
Yeah, I would just say, I don't know if that's really an MSD's purview. I would think that's really the city's responsibility.
It's part of sewer, so
Yes, but the stormwater aspect of the catch basins, I think, are the city's.
Okay, I'm sorry. Have a letter sent to MSD to evaluate the storm sewer system.
Got it. Anyone else? Any more new business? Thank you. We'll move on to communications. Item P1, Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding transfer of permit Norwood Express LLC to Norwood Petro. Mrs. Williams.
We received another notice to legislative authority from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control. This one's in regards to a permit, it looks like it's held by Norwood Express LLC, doing business as Norwood Express, or Norwood Petro Incorporated, DBA Norwood Sunoco. And it's the same as the usual request that we get. We need to complete and return the form to Division of Liquor Control to advise them whether or not we are requesting a hearing in regards to the permit.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Leonardo.
I would like that we receive and file, and if we so choose, would like to not have us present anything. So
Thank you, Mr.
I just waive that.
Mr. Thompson.
Second that.
Second that. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P2, Division of Liquor Control, Notice to Legislative Authorities. Mrs. Williams.
A letter to the clerk of Norwood City Council dated April 20th, 2021. This is a notice that all permits to sell alcoholic beverages in your political subdivision will expire on July 1st of 2021. In order to maintain permit privileges, every permit holder must file a renewal application. Ohio Revised Code, Section 4303.271B, provides the legislative authority with the right to object to the renewal of a permit and request a hearing. This hearing may be held in the county seat of the county in which the permit premises is located, if that request is made in writing. This will be your only opportunity to object to the renewal of a liquor permit premises, which might be a problem in your community. In order to register a valid objection with the Division of Liquor Control and request a hearing, the legislative authority must pass a resolution that specifies the problems at the liquor permit premises and the legal grounds for the objection as set forth in Ohio Revised Code, Section 4303.292A. It is suggested that a separate resolution be passed for each permit premises. The chief legal officer of your political subdivision must also submit a statement with the resolution that in the chief legal officer's opinion, the objection is based on substantial legal grounds within the meaning and intent of the Ohio Revised Code, Section 4303.292A. The resolution and chief legal officer's statement must be addressed to the Division of Liquor Control, Attention Legal Section 6606, Tussing Road, P.O. Box 4005, Reynoldsburg, Ohio 43068-9005, and postmarked no later than June 2nd of 2021. For your convenience, you may access our brochure entitled How to Object to the Issuance or Renewal of a Liquor Permit from our website at www.ohio.gov/LIQR. Under Licensing, click on Renewals, and under that mega menu, please select the link Object to the Issuance or Renewal of a Liquor Permit. You may wish to contact the law enforcement agency for your jurisdiction to determine if it has any information which will aid in your decision whether or not to object and request a hearing. For your convenience, you may obtain a list of issued permit holders in your jurisdiction from our website at the above link. Under Liquor Control, click on Look It Up, and under that mega menu, please select Search Permit Holders, Permit Applicant/Holder Information, Types and Status. You will then enter the search criteria for your county, city, township to bring up the issued permits in your jurisdiction. If you do not have access to the internet, you may request a list from us by writing the division at the below address. If you determine that there are no permit premises within your jurisdiction that you wish to object to, you do not need to take any action. The renewal applications for those premises will be submitted by the permit holders and will be processed by the division and issued as appropriate. If you have any questions, please contact the legal section at 614-644-2489. Sincerely, the licensing section.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzel.
Yeah, I move that we receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to receive and file. Mr. DiNardo?
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is, so basically there's not a lot of reasons why we can object to liquor permits, but, just because we don't like a business, we can't object to it. But there have been instances in the past where we have objected, and I think we almost certainly won. And one of them that comes to mind is the Sherman Market. And so I was just wanting to see if the law director could give some opinion on potentially looking at Stoney's and whether we might have grounds to object to their liquor permit, considering all of the complaints that we get from residents nearby.
Some more.
I'm sorry, in regards to which premises?
Stoney's.
Stoney's? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to do what we can to put together a decent resolution for the next council meeting to pass to object to Stoney's and ask for a hearing on Stoney's license, and gather as much specific information as we can. I'm not sure how many police runs there have been specifically to that location. There have been a bunch of noise complaints, but kind of the typical things that you get, which is, there's drug dealing, there's fights, there's that kind of thing. I don't think, at least that I know of, there has been too much of that. They have definitely been a nuisance, but they have also locked their doors to the police department and to the Division of Liquor Control when their inspectors came. And so I think that alone is grounds for us to raise a stink and at least try. But my intention is to have a resolution in front of council at the next council meeting for you guys to pass on that. If there are others that I'm not aware of any others that are that I'm aware of that are enough of an issue to raise. If there are others, please contact the law department as soon as you can, because again, we need an actual resolution passed by council in order to effectively object.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you very much. So I just want to add on to that. If there are, I'd love, maybe we even need a committee meeting at some point on this, but the neighbors have complained in the past and about the police essentially coming, but then not necessarily doing much, just kind of saying move along. I don't know, just it's telling people move along, but not like actually issuing citations. So if we do come to a point where that's like an actual issue to objecting, then it would be good to know about that, just so that we can see if the mayor can address it.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. That has been an ongoing discussion, and we've talked to the police department about here are the ways you can, here are the ordinances you can actually use in a situation like that. And so I think that they're starting to step up. Part of it is especially with the kind of the COVID opening up. It's a lot like the Xavier students. Now that you're more free to go about what you would want to do, you're much more of a nuisance. I mean, it was kind of quiet there for a while. It was, everything had to be closed at 10, and they were staying open after, but it was hard to prove. But it's, as the hours get later, the problems get worse, and so I think enforcement is going to step up. Just the awareness level has gone up, kind of like it started to with some of the Xavier student issues. So, I'm not sure what we have, even on the noise complaints, I'm not sure if that would be enough to get a permit revoked, but we're going to do what we can.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, just to respond to the law director, I think that's encouraging to hear the law department is directly involved in educating on strategies that we can use against stonies already, so that's good. I'm glad that conversation's happening. Just the neighbors are frustrated. Mr. Braden, I know you've heard about it. Mr. Gabbard, I know you've heard about it. You all both just living so close to it. So, and neighbors are just frustrated. They just don't know what to do. They've been complaining for so long. So, I just am encouraged by this action, and I look forward to council approving this at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Motion on the floor by Mr. Bonzo, second by Mr. DiNardo to receive and file the letter. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P3, communication from Mayor Victor Schneider regarding Mayor's Court fines.
Letter dated May 4th, 2021, to Mr. Ken Miracle, President, and members of the Norwood City Council regarding Mayor Court fines. Dear President and members of Council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of April 2021. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Victor Schneider, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Thompson.
Move we receive and file.
Motion by Mr. Thompson, receive and file. Mr. DiNardo?
I'd like to second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Geraci.
I will point out one number within this packet here, and that's because I was only asked a question. So, parking citations were at 144 last month. So, it was a big complaint, and it was asked of me several times. So I just wanted to at least let the audience know how many parking citations were issued.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Any other comments? Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item P4, earnings tax collection report from Tax Commissioner Chuck Barlow.
Letter dated May 6, 2021, to the City of Norwood Council. Dear members of council, attached are the earnings tax collection reports for the year ended December 31st, 2020, and through April 30th, 2021. Respectfully, Chuck Barlow, Tax Commissioner.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Let it be received and filed. Motion, please.
Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and file. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo? Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item R, adjournment. Mr. Braden.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Braden to adjourn. You have a second. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson? Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. We are adjourned.